Welcome. This is The Deep Dive. And here, well, we take your source material, all the articles, the research notes you've pulled together, and we basically help you dig out the really key insights.
Yeah, insights that might be kind of buried in there.
Exactly. And today we're plunging into some really fascinating stuff centered around recent events in Formula One. Specifically, we're looking at the Aston Martin team, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, especially after what happened at the Spanish Grand Prix.
Right. You've given us a bunch of sources here, and they offer, well, pretty different angles and details on this rather mysterious incident involving Stroll in Barcelona.
Yeah, mysterious is a good word for it.
And they also give us some really deep insight into Alonso's recent performance, his whole attitude, and, the ongoing development or lack thereof, maybe, of the Aston Martin car.
So our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack that whole timeline of events around Stroll suddenly pulling out of the race. We want to explore the different stories, the paddock rumors versus what the team officially said.
Yeah, the gossip versus the PR line.
Pretty much. And delve into the details of Stroll's injury history, what that means for Canada, his home race coming up.
And then we pivot, right.
Yeah, completely shift gears. We need to understand what your sources are telling us about Fernando Alonso's attitude,
right,
which frankly sounds incredible, and also the specifics of the Aston Martin car right now, how it actually performs.
It's really about taking all these bits of information you've gathered, seeing how they slot together, where they kind of clash.
Yeah, where the stories don't quite line up.
Exactly. And trying to build a clearer picture of what's really going on behind the scenes. Because in F1, there's always stuff happening way beyond just the lap times you see on a Sunday afternoon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. Starting with that, well, quite strange situation around Lance Stroll over that Barcelona weekend.
Yeah, strange is definitely the word.
Your sources really highlight this unusual kind of confusing sequence of events that ended with Lance Stroll just not starting the race. It all seemed to kick off after qualifying on Saturday. He got knocked out in Q2, finished P14.
And interestingly, the sources note his Q2 time was actually slower than his Q1 time. He was P7 in Q1, ahead of Alonso in that session, which is kind of relevant context too.
Good point. But what's really fascinating here as you dig through the material is that there was absolutely zero public sign of any issue with Stroll before that point. Not before the weekend, not during practice, nothing.
Yeah, you watch the footage. He gets out of the car after Q2, goes through the media pen, talks to journalists.
Standard procedure.
Totally standard. And outwardly, everything seems completely normal. No grimacing, no hint of discomfort, no visible sign he was hurt right then.
But then, right after that Q2 session finished, something significant happened, or rather, didn't happen.
Right.
Your sources point to this key detail. He missed the mandatory FIA driver weighing.
Ah, yes. The weigh-in.
Now, for anyone listening who isn't deep into every F1 rule, this is crucial. It's totally non-negotiable.
Absolutely mandatory.
When a driver gets knocked out, Q1, Q2, doesn't matter. They have to go straight from the car, back to the garage, directly to the FIA weigh bridge.
Immediately. It's not about weighing the driver themselves. It's the car plus driver, minimum weight check, compliance.
Right. Exactly. And skipping that specific step right after getting out of the car. Well, it's highly unusual.
Very unusual. And at first, when the news came out, he missed it. Maybe you think, okay, an oversight, maybe a penalty's coming, but nothing huge.
Right.
But looking back now, knowing what happened next, your sources really pinpoint that missed weigh-in as the first, let's say, crack in the official story, the first odd point in the timeline that led to the withdrawal.
Precisely. And that detail, missing the weigh-in, it's critical because, as the sources show, it ties directly into what happened next and the explanations that came later. Because later that evening, Saturday night, after all the usual post-quality stuff was done, we got the official word from Aston Martin.
The statement.
Yeah, the statement saying Lance Stroll had withdrawn from the Spanish Grand Prix due to a wrist injury.
And that's where, for a lot of people watching, and definitely inside the paddock, things just started to feel odd.
Yeah, suddenly a wrist injury, pulling out of the race.
Given, like you said, there was no prior hint, no visible issue earlier, even right after Q2, he seemed fine heading to the media. It just felt abrupt, unexplained.
And the sources mentioned that over the next day, so Sunday morning leading up to the race, the paddock rumor mill, as one source calls it.
Hey, always churning.
It just went into overdrive. That lack of clear information about a sudden race-ending injury right after a seemingly normal quali session, it just fueled massive speculation.
Understandably.
Things were developing fast behind the scenes. There was even a steward's hearing about him missing that weigh-in, which obviously brought more official eyes onto the whole situation.
And actually, it was from that steward's hearing, maybe surprisingly, that a few more crucial details finally came out. Details that started painting a slightly clearer, though still pretty confusing, picture of the official timeline after Q2.
Okay, so what came out?
The info released after the hearing showed that, okay, after the media pen following his Q2 exit, Stroll had gone out the back of the garage.
Right.
Then he'd gone to the Circuit Medical Center, complained of wrist pain there, and was advised by the medical staff not to race.
Okay, advised not to race.
And following that advice, he then left the track completely.
So you piece together this official timeline from the steward's report, which kind of contradicts how it looked initially.
Yeah.
Q2 exit media pen looked okay. Then back of garage, then medical center, pain complaint, advised not to race, then left track.
And somewhere in that sequence, crucially, after the media pen and probably around the time he was leaving, he missed that mandatory weigh-in.
It's just not the typical flow, is it? If you suddenly get a really bad acute injury on track, you'd expect to go straight to the medical center.
Exactly. Like a crash, you go right there.
The delay, the fact you did the media pen first, then the medical visit, then leaving after missing the weigh-in, all of that, as your sources really emphasize, just added to the mystery. It raised big questions about the exact timing, the severity, when this issue actually flared up.
Yeah, it wasn't that direct, urgent path from car to medical center you'd expect after a clear incident.
Yeah.
It was the sequence with other things happening, first media, the missed weigh-in. That order just felt out of step with a narrative of a sudden, urgent, race-stopping injury decision.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, and where the sources start digging into these conflicting stories.
The rumors versus reality bit.
Exactly.
Right.
Over that weekend, especially Sunday morning before the race, the sources talk about this paddock gossip that really took hold. It was being talked about everywhere in the F1 bubble. And the extreme version of this rumor suggested that Lance Stroll, being really frustrated, really upset after that disappointing Q2.
Where he was slower than Q1, yeah.
Slower than Q1, out-qualified by Alonso,
Yeah.
that he lost his temper. Big time. This version claimed he was furious, basically threw his toys out of the tram, maybe shouted at team members, engineers, might have smashed things up in the garage in anger. And critically, that he hurt his wrist doing that.
Wow, okay. So the rumor linked the anger directly to the injury.
Directly. And the rumor even suggested he then just stormed off, left the track immediately, and flew straight out to Geneva.
Yeah.
It was a very dramatic story.
You can see why that would spread like wildfire.
So did anyone check this with the team? Yes. One of your sources did exactly that. Put these rumors directly to the Aston Martin team spokesperson to get their official response. And the team's response is quite telling, actually. The spokesperson did not deny Stroll was upset about the Q2 result.
Okay, so they acknowledged the frustration.
Yeah. Acknowledged he was frustrated, felt there was more in the car than P14, especially after Q1. They even admitted, apparently, that worse than words had been exchanged.
Woo, interesting phrasing. So some heated words, at least.
Seems like it. Maybe not outright abuse, but definitely some serious verbal frustration or venting in the garage after qualifying.
Okay. But what about the injury link? The punching things rumor.
That's where the team draws a very firm line. They strongly emphasize that the upset, the frustration, wasn't linked to the wrist injury in the way the rumor suggested.
Right.
They explicitly denied any punching of items, hitting walls, anything that caused or aggravated the wrist injury. Their position is adamant. The injury issue and the frustration happened around the same time concurrently after qualifying. But they're separate things. Parallel, not cause and effect.
So frustration happened, wrist issue flared up, but one didn't cause the other, according to the team.
Exactly. And the source speaker reflecting on this describes it as, a classic case of paddock whispers.
Yeah, the pit lane telephone game.
Precisely. How information, or often misinformation, just travels down the pit lane, gets twisted, exaggerated, embellished with each telling. So while acknowledging Stroll was definitely upset, and there was some venting, this source doesn't personally believe the upset caused him to leave, or was the root of the injury. So you end up with these two really different stories playing out.
Yeah, the dramatic tantrum causes injury rumor versus the team's more measured account of two separate things happening at once, frustration and an existing wrist problem suddenly becoming critical.
It's just a situation perfectly set up for speculation and exaggeration, isn't it? especially when the withdrawal itself was unexpected and the initial details were so thin.
Absolutely. That vacuum of clear information just got filled by the most dramatic version doing the rounds.
Okay, let's connect this back to the injury itself now, because this isn't actually the first time Lance Stroll has had serious wrist trouble.
No, not at all. And the sources bring this up prominently. We all remember that cycling crash he had back in early 2023.
Right, which made him miss preseason testing in Bahrain. Big deal at the time.
And what's fascinating and gives really important context here, according to your sources, is not just the original injury, but how he came back from it.
Yeah, that comeback was something else.
He rushed back incredibly for the very first race of 2023 in Bahrain. It was only about 12 days after that serious accident and the surgery he needed.
12 days.
12 days. Racing with plates and screws still in his wrist, reportedly in a lot of pain, visible pain.
I remember seeing pictures, yeah.
One source even mentions the detail of him actually touching Alonso during that race, a racing incident, but it happened while Stroll was driving hard despite clearly being hampered, and he still finished in the points.
Incredible toughness.
Totally. The sources mentioned videos online back then showing his intense, painful physio just to get back in the car that quickly.
So your sources say, understandably, he carried the effects, probably some pain from that original injury for the first few races of 2023.
Yeah, it wasn't an instant fix.
But then, importantly, it just stopped being a story. It wasn't mentioned by him, the team, anyone really, as an ongoing issue. Until now, until Barcelona, over a year later.
And this is exactly where the official timeline the team gave after the Barcelona withdrawal starts to get questioned and picked apart by one of the sources.
Right.
Because while there was no public mention, the team stated post-Barcelona that he's actually been feeling pain from this wrist issue for the last 6 weeks or so.
6 weeks. Since around Jeddah, basically.
Yeah, covering that whole run of races.
Yeah.
Jeddah, Australia, Japan, China, Miami, Imola, Monaco.
Wow, okay, so this is the point the sources really hone in on. If he's allegedly had pain for 6 weeks, pain bad enough that eventually doctors advised him not to race, why did that critical decision, the withdrawal based on medical advice, come so suddenly and specifically after qualifying in Barcelona?
Right, a qualifying session, which, while demanding, isn't usually as tough on the body as a full race.
Or arguably less tough on the wrist than Monaco, which he completed during this 6-week pain period.
That's exactly. Or Imola, which is notoriously bumpy. The sources just keep coming back to the oddity, the specific timing of that sudden final withdrawal decision right after qualifying in Spain.
The team denies it was caused by, punching something in the garage like that old Lewis Hamilton story from 2016.
Yes, the door incident. They deny that.
But it's also not immediately obvious from the official story what specific thing about driving in Q2 on Saturday afternoon suddenly made a 6-week pain issue unbearable.
Barcelona isn't known for being super bumpy. It is tough physically, lots of high G corners, sustained load through the body, arms, wrists, turns 3, 4, 9, 10.
Yeah, very demanding.
But the question is, was Saturday fundamentally different from Friday practice or the previous races he did, supposedly with the same pain?
Your sources talk about how, actually, it's pretty common for F1 drivers to carry niggles, minor injuries, throughout a season. They race through pain more often than we probably realize.
Oh, for sure. Alonso himself has talked about managing back pain. It's part of the job for these guys.
And they also note Lance Stroll is famously very private, keeps his personal life, any physical issues, very much to himself. Often shuts down media questions about that stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't tend to share much publicly.
So the sources suggest maybe that privacy partly explains why he hadn't mentioned this alleged 6 weeks of pain until it became unavoidable in Barcelona.
And one really plausible idea raised by the sources is that it could just be a cumulative thing.
Building up over time.
Exactly. Think about the crazy start to this season, back-to-backs, triple headers.
Ridiculous.
Plus, these current cars, insane downforce, massive cornering forces, super sticky tires letting them push harder. Then you add the heat in Barcelona. It all pushes the drivers physically harder than ever.
So the theory is something started niggling away, as they put it, early on.
Yeah, maybe in Jeddah or Australia.
And with no real break in the schedule, no chance for proper rest, that underlying pain just got worse and worse over those 6 weeks.
Until it hit a critical point in Barcelona where he just couldn't continue safely.
That makes sense as a possibility. But even if you accept that cumulative pain idea, the core question the sources keep finding very strange is still the timing.
Why then?
Why did the absolute "you cannot race" medical advice come specifically after qualifying on Saturday? when he'd already driven Friday practice, done multiple laps, when he'd completed Monaco, arguably much tougher on the wrists, supposedly with this increasing pain.
Yeah. It's the precise moment after Q2, amidst the garage rumors that the sources find so strikingly coincidental. It's the hardest part of the official story to just accept easily.
Maybe it suggested they were hoping to manage it, get through Barcelona, and maybe use a gap later for a quiet procedure.
Possibly. Trying to just get away with it until there's a bigger break in the calendar to sort it out without missing a race. But perhaps in Barcelona, either the pain just hit that breaking point or maybe something else happened we don't know about.
And the medical assessment on Saturday afternoon was just definitive. Stop now. Get it fixed, regardless of the timing or how it looked.
Could be. That's one way to square the circle, maybe.
Now, your sources do confirm that Lance Stroll has now had a medical procedure on his wrist since Barcelona.
Yes, that seems definite. Which does show the injury was real and needed intervention.
And it seems very likely, based on the sources, he went back to the same medical team, same specialist surgeon in Barcelona who did the operation after the cycling crash in 2023.
Yeah, a guy named Javier, apparently very famous, works with lots of MotoGP riders, highly trusted in motorsport for hand and wrist stuff.
And the sources note Stroll stayed in Barcelona after leaving the track on Saturday, specifically to have this procedure done there.
Which brings us back to the Canada question.
Exactly. What's fascinating here, and gives maybe some hope for his home race, is that comparison to 2023 again.
The 12-day turnaround.
Right. He came back just 12 days after a much more serious accident and major surgery involving plates and screws. That detail suggests returning for Canada, which is about a 2-week gap from the Barcelona procedure, is definitely possible.
Assuming this procedure wasn't as big a deal as the first one.
But that's the catch, isn't it? That's where the uncertainty lies, according to the sources. We just don't have the specific details of what the procedure actually was this time.
Was it minor? Just a tidying up, as they say.
Hmm.
Cleaning out some scar tissue, removing old hardware.
Or did bones need fixing? Was it muscle, tendon inflammation, keyhole surgery? You don't know.
And until the specifics are clear, the sources say it's really hard to know for sure if he'll be fine for Canada or if he's genuinely still a doubt. That lack of detail is why his participation in his home race is still up in the air right now.
Although Aston Martin has been pretty consistent, saying their plan A is for Lance to race in Canada. They were saying that even before the procedure happened.
Which suggests they expected it wouldn't be too serious or require a long recovery that would definitely rule him out. They seem hopeful.
But hope isn't a strategy in F1, is it? They absolutely need a plan B, maybe even a plan C.
Oh, definitely. Just in case the procedure was worse than hoped or there are complications, or even if he flies to Canada but the pain flares up in Friday practice.
And Aston Martin has 2 official reserve drivers, Felipe Drugovich and Stoffel Van Dorn.
Yep. But here's the kicker, the big complication your sources highlight.
The Le Mans clash.
Exactly. Both Drugovich and Van Dorn are scheduled to race in the 24 hours of Le Mans, on the exact same weekend as the Canadian Grand Prix.
Terrible timing for Aston Martin. Van Dorn's with Peugeot, Drugovich with Cadillac.
Really awkward. Bad luck, basically.
So who would they likely call if needed?
From what the sources understand, Drugovich is probably top of their list. He's got a lot more F1 mileage under his belt now compared to before.
More seat time, yeah.
The team might feel he's the better option, especially as a fallback if Lance tries driving on Friday in Canada but finds he can't continue.
And the rules allow that, right? Replacing a driver late?
Yeah, the sources explain the timing. You can swap a driver right up until after FP3 on Saturday morning, as long as the replacement hasn't qualified or driven before qualifying starts.
That's why they couldn't swap in Spain. Lance had already started quali.
Exactly. So that rule gives them flexibility in Canada if Lance drives Friday but has to pull out Saturday morning.
But Drugovich has Le Mans commitments even before the race weekend, doesn't he?
He does. There's a mandatory Le Mans test day the Sunday before Canada, so getting him fully available for Plan B in Montreal might need some quick logistical footwork.
Okay, so if Drugovich is tricky, what's Plan C?
The other option Aston could look at, given the Le Mans clash, is maybe calling on the Mercedes reserve, Valtteri Bottas.
Ah, Bottas.
Yeah, he often travels to races anyway, kind of in this roving reserve role for Mercedes customer teams, McLaren, Williams, Aston Martin, potentially if their own reserves are tied up.
So he could be an option if Drugovich is stuck with Le Mans, or maybe even just as an extra backup if things look okay for Stroll, but they want a seasoned pro on standby.
Exactly. He's a potential plan C. But ultimately, the sources are pretty confident we won't see some crazy scenario where Stroll drives Friday, says, ouch, my wrist hurts,
Right.
and the team has literally no one ready to jump in.
They'll have backups sorted.
Absolutely. There will be a plan B, maybe a plan C, all lined up behind the scenes, even if plan A is still, as the team says, Lance Racing in Montreal. It just really highlights those background logistical headaches F1 teams deal with constantly.
Okay, so we've really dug into the Stroll mystery, all the questions there. Let's completely flip the coin now. Let's talk about the other side of the Aston Martin garage.
Fernando Alonso.
Your sources give some really interesting perspectives on his recent performance and the state of that Aston Martin AMR24 car itself.
Yeah, there's definitely been a noticeable shift recently, especially on Saturdays. The sources point out very clearly, since the team brought that first big update package in Imola.
First one of the season for them.
Right. Since then, we've seen this clear trend emerge in Alonso's qualifying results.
And that trend is?
Q3, consistently making it into the top 10 shootout. He qualified P5 in Imola, P6 in Monaco, then P5 again in Barcelona.
Impressive consistency there.
And crucially, in the race in Spain, despite difficulties, he did manage to score points. Got P9, 2 points, after starting 10th because someone else had a penalty.
So the sources see this as progress.
They describe it as maybe a small change or a significant first step, especially compared to their early season struggles versus last year's podiums. But it's seen as a meaningful, positive move after those tougher opening races.
And this ability to suddenly hit Q3 consistently really shows how incredibly tight that midfield battle is, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. One source points out, you look at Q1, Q2 timesheets, often you've got 6, 7 drivers crammed within the same tenth of a second.
Tiny margins.
Tiny margins. So getting just 1/10 from an update when the field is that compressed, that can literally jump you from P14 to P7.
So that Imola update seems to have given Alonso that crucial edge, particularly over one lap.
It seems so. That small improvement appears to be enabling those much higher, more consistent starting spots for him.
But there's always a but in F1. The analysis from your sources points to a very clear contrast in the car's performance right now.
Yeah. While the one-lap pace is clearly better enough for Q3, at least with Alonso driving.
Right. Key qualifier there.
The sources are quite firm that the race pace of the AMR24 is still, quote, very complicated. It's still a big area needing major improvement compared to their rivals.
So it suggests the car could be pushed hard for one lap, maybe aggressive tire use, specific setup to get that qualifying result. But it still struggles over race distance, managing tires, maintaining balance, keeping up with the likes of McLaren, Ferrari, maybe even others in that midfield fight who seem stronger on Sundays.
That seems to be the picture painted by the sources. Good on Saturday, tougher on Sunday.
And this leads to a really critical, almost provocative insight from the sources. It connects both driver situations and the whole team performance view.
Yeah, this is a strong statement.
One source says very directly, they believe the Aston Martin car is only genuinely a Q3 car when it has sticker 14 on it.
Meaning, only when Fernando Alonso is driving it.
The implication is pretty stark, isn't it? According to this view, the other car, without Alonso's specific abilities, his experience, his knack for extracting the absolute maximum.
Yeah, that car is still basically performing at maybe a Q1 or low Q2 level on pure underlying pace.
And this source argues this Alonso effect, as they call it, actually distorts the reality of the car's baseline performance.
Distorts it how?
They think it's so significant it might have even contributed to Aston Martin feeling a bit lost last year in 2023 after the early podiums dried up.
Ah, because Alonso was making the car look better than it was.
That's the theory. He was getting results, performing at a level way beyond the car's true capability, which maybe made it harder for the team to accurately see its real weaknesses and what needed fixing. An interesting perspective.
Very interesting. It changes how you might view their development path.
Now, despite these car limitations, especially race pace, and the fact Alonso is often fighting for like P9 or P10 now.
Not exactly where he wants to be.
Not at all. Fighting guys he wouldn't have raced against in his championship years. Despite all that, your sources express just huge fascination, admiration really, for Alonso's attitude, his continued drive.
Yeah, they really emphasize how almost unbelievable, maybe unprecedented, his motivation still is at this stage.
I mean, think about it. 22 years in F1, 2 world titles, 32 wins, over 100 podiums, fought against Schumacher, Raikkonen, Hamilton at their peak.
Legends.
And yet he still attacks these races, even when it's just for a couple of points for P9, with the exact same obvious drive, the same ambition, the same fierce intensity.
The sources use some really powerful language to describe it. They talk about him having the same hunger, the same criminal instinct for every tiny advantage.
Criminal instinct, I like that.
The willingness to give it his all, even metaphorically tear his chest out on track just to gain 1 or 2 points for the team. It's raw competitiveness.
They mentioned interviewing him after P9 in Spain.
Yeah.
Asked if he was happy. He wasn't really happy, just content, maybe accepting.
Because P9 isn't the goal.
Exactly. It's not what he ultimately wants. He wants more. But that level of fight, even when far from the ultimate prize, is what the sources find just incredible.
They explicitly call it extraordinary. Maybe unprecedented for a driver with that long, decorated career who isn't currently fighting for wins.
Yeah, they draw a clear contrast with other senior drivers.
Yeah.
Suggesting someone like Lewis Hamilton, for example, doesn't seem to show that same raw hunger when he's not right at the sharp end fighting for victories.
It's not meant as a dig, more an observation on Alonso's unique, enduring intensity.
And it's framed with this great metaphor from the sources, maintaining hunger even when you're basically dying of starvation because the car doesn't work at the level you need.
That really captures it.
This deep dive into his motivation, his passion, his almost unmatched competitive spirit, it's presented as a really key, remarkable takeaway about Alonso from your source material.
Definitely. Now, looking ahead for Aston Martin and the car, that Imola update, as we said, is seen as just the first step.
More needed, clearly.
Oh, yeah. The sources mention the ongoing speculation about more significant updates, maybe coming around Silverstone later in the season. They reference names like Andy Cowell, Adrian Newey, in the context of the team building its technical strength for the future.
The hope, then, is because that midfield is so tight.
Super tight.
Even another small step up from future updates, like Imola seemed to provide for Alonso in qualifying, could potentially mean a big jump forward in results.
That's the theory. A small gain could yield big rewards in that pack. But the sources also urge caution, a bit of skepticism about when these big improvements will actually hit the track and work.
Yeah.
They mention that when they ask the team about update timings, the answer